What you guys have developed in New Zealand, you've actually found a really good line-out guy in Holland. Roy Garn came back to show you what you need at scrum half.
Can you see more of the experimentation that we saw in the Rugby Championship going on these northern tours? Or do you think that both coaches, Scott Robertson and Rassie Erasmus, are going to be looking at these completely different and it's just more absolute results driven?
Fantastic header to create your try. I think Rassie will now be looking at that as you pushing the envelope and bringing football tactics into rugby.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Rugby Championship wrapped up, of course, across the weekend, and now we've got the autumn internationals to look forward to. A full fixture list indeed. Who is the best team in the world? Is it South Africa? Is that guaranteed? Do we all just absolutely rubber stamp that? Who's the second best team? Or is it all going to be sorted out come the end of the year when South Africa play both Ireland and France away, and the All Blacks have just got that small matter of a grand slam? We've got lots to talk about with our good mate Chris Jones. Times Online, Rugby Pass. Twickenham on the weekend, sold out for Argentina's home game against South Africa. New Zealand taking care of business, of course, but the Springboks win the Rugby Championship. So, welcome back, Chris, for a start. Are South Africa the best team in the world right now?
Well, absolutely. There are the rankings. The world rankings show it. And congratulations, you're back up to the second best team in the world and the second best in the Southern Hemisphere. So you must be feeling absolutely fantastic.
Well, it was 19 all in terms of points at the top of the table there, but a lot to unpack, isn't there, from that Rugby Championship? Let's start at Twickenham, where the Argies, that was their home game, couldn't hang on, 27-29 in the end, the final score. But after watching that game myself, I never thought South Africa were in trouble of losing that game. What were your thoughts?
What the most shocking thing about the fact is, one that they're not playing in Buenos Aires, but when you're working on something like 30 to 50% more income, if you bring the game to Twickenham rather than Buenos Aires, you can see why they did it. And most of the players are playing in Europe anyway. But what shocked me was the complete disappearance. And who knows where it is now. The Argentine scrum has ceased to exist. This used to be the most feared weapon they possessed. And it's become a joke. And it was just ridiculous to see a 7-man Bok scrum, putting them on casters and wheeling them straight back towards the line. It's a real problem for Argentina because I like watching them at the moment. They go to the edge really well. They got to the edge plenty of times against South Africa, caused their defense some problems. But whenever the ball was dropped, you could see almost their two props going, well, should we bother going down with the scrum? Let's go to uncontested because we'll probably won't move then, because it is, Marty, I think it's one of the great shames of Argentina rugby. They've allowed this to happen because they've got great big blokes, and I do not know what happened to their technique. It's just gone out the window.
When you look at that Rugby Championship, and I'm always fascinated from your perspective, from your side of the world, just in terms of the standard of it, because here we are, we're lauding South Africa, of course, yes, but they lost twice. They got smacked up at Ellis Park by Australia. Let's not forget that. They also lost at Eden Park. They lost 2 out of the first 3 matches. We lost to South Africa, of course. We lost to Argentina. We did beat Australia twice. It was one of those championships where everyone did beat everyone. So just in terms of the overall standard of it and say comparison to what you saw in the Six Nations this year.
Well, I think you lurched towards the Six Nations type of competition because wasn't it great to see a tournament which really kept everybody guessing right to the end, because who knows who's going to win. I mean, Australia going and winning at altitude was quite remarkable. But I think what's happened is that all 4 teams taking part in this championship, and we are in that cycle towards 27 in Australia, the World Cup. Everybody's been trying to feed in new players, and I think that was certainly the case with Australia, and boy, do they need them. The only thing is they have so few players to bring in, that a few injuries, and they're flying people 51-hour round trips to Leicester and back in the case of James O'Connor just to play. But you guys have drafted in some young players who are starting to make a real impression. Tapia, 2 tries in that final game, he may be the answer to your 13. Who knows? But we're going to find out on this tour. The Argentinas, they have some very exciting backs. Delgui and Chocovazes were really good. We won't talk about their pack because obviously it's the old blokes and the rubbish front row. And South Africa spent the entire championship blooding new faces, trying. We all said, well, you're always going to have Diolande and Creel in the centre. No, you're not. Suddenly you've got two new centres, and Murray, he was very lucky not to be sent off for 2 yellow cards against Argentina, but he's shown real glimpses there. And they've got an outside half now, Feinberg Magumazulu, who is just exciting to watch. And yes, they can go back to Pollard, they can go to Libbok, although we all know that can lead to problems. But they now have 3 really good number 10s, and I think that is something that they purposely did. And you knew that Razzie was going to do something with this championship. It wasn't going to be a normal championship when he's involved, and he's brought on a lot of really good players. And so I saw this as a development for so many of the teams in this championship, while trying to get momentum. And of course, you hit some roadblocks. When you do that, you make some poor decisions on selection. You throw people in too early, and I think that's what we saw on a number of occasions. And the opposition took advantage, and I think that made it a much more interesting rugby championship, and one that certainly made more of an impact up here.
Great quote from Rassie afterwards where he says, I think we're the best team in this. And, they did win it, so it's fair. And he said, I've blooded 47 players. Well, we blooded 43. We didn't blood them. I mean, obviously, we played 43 players, which is a hell of a lot. Back in the Steve Hansen days, I think we got up to 50 at one stage, and we probably will get to that stage when, we play these 4 tests on the Northern Hemisphere tour. So there is that element, and it's very obvious and very clear, isn't it? There is, yes, we need to win these games, but yes, also every team is now, as you say, in that, okay, we've got 2 years to go before the World Cup, and we've actually got to find, what are they looking at, 3 or 4 players in every single position is the target, isn't it?
Yeah, Rassie went to the nth degree, as he would do. I mean, he's looking for 5 or 6 players in the same position. But, you look at their pack, and are we going to get 2 more full years out of great warriors like Marks and Estevet? Peter Steps with all his injuries. So they've got to have this group of players coming through. But what they've done is quite cleverly is fed them in with the existing stars of that pack. And they produce, a couple of scrums, entire scrums that other countries would love to have. What you guys have developed in New Zealand, you've actually found a really good lineup guy in Holland. You've got, unfortunately, obviously, Via won't be coming because he's injured, but I thought he had a fantastic championship. And Roygaard came back to show you what you need at scrum half, just to give you that real impetus. And it's a learning process. I think every team has to be clever enough to admit, we need to take a step back at some point and give these youngsters a chance, but do it in a controlled way. The problem for Australia, of course, is they just have to throw everybody in. But at least they came up with Jorgensen, who I thought was absolutely fantastic.
Chris, the standard of the rugby, though, in the middle of the experimenting, I mean, we saw some great games. We saw some outrageous results, and especially that first run at Ellis Park, and then what the Boks managed to do to us in Wellington. But just in actual terms of it, was it a great championship to watch rugby-wise, if you're just a fan of the game or not a fan of the game?
I think so. You could say, the final game in Perth was affected by the weather, so it became a different sort of match. But it had its intensity. It had that fantastic header to create your try. I think that should be brought more into. I think Rassie will now be looking at that as pushing the envelope and bringing football tactics into rugby. Well done, Mr. Barrett, on that. But I thought the actual quality was good. There was some really good attacking play, and I know that Tony Brown's been trying to bring this into the South African system. And yes, at times it did get a bit wild and off the cuff to an extent that it wasn't controlled. And you had flashes of that against Argentina, which meant that the Argentinians had more opportunity to counterattack. Well, you could say, is that fantastic rugby? Well, the opposition, the mindset is to attack. And I think that was what was great to see from Argentina, is that they are prepared to go from anywhere. And I think that's also the situation now with Australia. They know they have to go from everywhere, and they've got real pace, when all their players are fit. You guys love that more slightly structured way of doing it, but again, you got individuals who have come through now who can play at this level, and I think that's what's now is about how you meld them into a real All Black team that can go on and try and win a Grand Slam, which it hasn't happened for 15 years, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at those fixtures, and two of them especially stand out. Obviously, Ireland and Chicago, and England at Twickenham. And then, as I said right at the very start, South Africa playing Ireland and Dublin, and then that match against France. Now, I'm at pains to point out to all Black fans, whoever is grumbling about this, that despite the losses, and we have had 6 so far in the 23 games, we're not happy about that since Scott Robertson's been in charge. But we've also beaten every team in the world that we need to beat over the last couple of years. And winning against South Africa at Eden Park, a really important result for this particular group of players, because we'd lost 4 in a row, Chris. Okay, they turned around and they belted us the following week. We don't know about France here because they sent down a reduced squad to play us. But a long-winded way of saying, is that something that you can put a tick in for the All Blacks, that yes, we've managed to at least conquer that beast and beat South Africa and prove that we can actually do it? So that's a huge thing to take out of this Rugby Championship. Plus, of course, that South Africa-France game, is that potentially the number 1 and number 2 sides in the world playing off?
Well, not according to the rankings, it's not.
The rankings.
Because, France are down to 4th according to the rankings, and okay, they'll have a quite a useful scrum half coming back in November, so he'll be back on the scene. But that 31 years of Eden Park, it is such a comfort blanket. But you can't always rely. You've got to take that confidence and that the ability to beat the very best in the world on the road now. And that for some of these young players, it's going to be a real shock to the system. Horrible weather. In Murrayfield, they're very lucky to be playing Ireland in Chicago, because it's not going to be a wet one in Dublin with that crowd going bonkers. So it's quite a nice way to start. But there's some perils ahead. Don't write the Scots off with Finn Russell coming off the Lions tour. He hasn't actually started playing yet. They've given all the Lions players 3 weeks off at the start of the season, so they'll be starting to feed in. Although we are slightly concerned over Maratoge, who's still getting over the effects of the concussion from the tour. They hope he might be available in the next couple of weeks, but there's no guarantee. So there are, for the home countries, there are some concerns over injuries and whether the players can pick up their game as quickly as they need to take on you lot who are coming red hot off what we all think was one of the best championships. So you look at the All Blacks and think, well, can they do a Grand Slam? Well, quite honestly, England have a huge number of players, let alone the guys who are on the Lions tour. Remember, they went to Argentina, won both test matches.
Yeah, good point.
And played some really fantastic rugby. And what is going to be a big improvement for England is that they've now got Bath's attack coach, Lee Blackett, who used to be in charge of Wasps. He's going to be in charge of the England attack. And suddenly that game with Twickenham for the All Blacks will take on a very different look.
Can you see more of the experimentation that we saw in the Rugby Championship going on these northern tours? Or do you think that both coaches, Scott Robertson and Rassie Erasmus, are going to be looking at these completely different and it's just more absolute results driven, given the fact that we've got a World Cup only a couple of years away?
I would have expected it, Marty, if I hadn't seen the comments from Scott about going for the Grand Slam. So patently, he's not going to be throwing in people who have not performed at this level, and that means yet another series of massive matches for Artie Severe to get through. Yeah. And I don't see the experimentation from the All Blacks while they're going for the Grand Slam, not at all, because it's going to be such a marker to put down 2 years out from the World Cup. But for the South Africans, who knows what Rassie's going to do now, because he's got basically 2 or 3 teams he could be playing. I would be surprised if he brings everybody, because he really does have to look after these older statesmen. How long can Elizabeth go on taking these hits? And what he's seeing now is him being put on his backside rather than him putting everybody else on their backside. So there's going to be sort of a worry about how many miles are on the clock for a number of those players. But, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't throw in a few more curveballs just to see how the Northern Hemisphere teams react to what his teams can do. Because, you've got the chance of, you could be turned up to play against South Africa, that 3 different outside halves could turn up. And that fundamentally affects the way that Tony's game plan can be put into operation, particularly if Pollard's at 10, because it's patently not going to be the same as we just saw in that last match.
Chris, finally, we thank you always for your time and your thoughts. The fantasy team selected from the 4 Rugby Championship playing nations. Well, at least the All Blacks won that. We had 5 players in, 4 from Australia, 4 from South Africa, 2 from Argentina. For what it's worth, what does it mean? What can we take from that? What, that we've got more better individual players, or is that just somebody's silly selection and we leave it where it is?
Well, it's probably on the silly selection bit, but 4 of those 5 players are in the pack. Needless to say, Mr. Sevilla is in there. Newell's there, Vi and Holland are the second rows, and your only back is Jordan, which is not surprising. So, yeah, if you can just try and find a few more world-class backs, I'm sure you'll be all right, especially going for the Grand Slam.
Well, how good is that going to be, and how much to look forward to that we've got these autumn internationals? And they really do carry some weight, don't they? They carry weight because of the names involved, but they carry weight also because of the closeness that we've got to this tournament. So it's not like the international rugby season is finished. And we always like to come up there and give you some come-uppance, and you know that, so get ready for it.
Look, we can't wait to see you. You know, the Lions showed you that we have some pretty good players. And individually, the countries have been going okay. You know, Ireland have been a bit of rebuilding, but they've got some good young players coming through. Scotland are dangerous. England are looking really good. And please don't mention Wales.
We won't be mentioning Wales for a long time yet, Chris.
DSPN.